So now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Stephen Hicks back to the stage for our discussion, The Political Spectrums.
Okay, this is billed as a workshop, so we'll get to work. I don't want to do a formal lecture, but I do want to lay some material out for discussion. And then the work part is, at your tables there should be a sheet of paper with some spectrums along them, so grab one of those, make sure you have it in front of you, maybe get a pen ready, and then when the moment is right, we'll work on that a little bit. So the issue of the political spectrum, we argue a lot about politics, we think a lot about politics, a lot of issues at stake, and we have a lot of big abstract concepts and words that we sometimes use. Sometimes they're concepts, sometimes they're more sloppy labels that get thrown around, and those cause more frustration. But here's a sample list, brainstorm within a couple of minutes. A whole lot of isms, right? Conservatism, liberalism, anarchism, capitalism, et cetera, et cetera. A couple of crassies thrown in at the end, democracy, right? Theocracy, and so on. And it's not meant to be a complete list, there's just a whole bunch of stuff. So what do we do with this list? How do we navigate this territory? And hopefully in a way that can speed up our discussions and make us not be talking past each other a lot. So there is a conceptualization issue that is built into being able to think about and talk about politics fruitfully. Now one unhappy way of doing this is, what we sometimes do is to say, well, all political positions fall either on the left or on the right. That is to say, we take the previous dozen isms and more, and we want to then say there's one big uber categorization scheme, a spectrum, and there's all the ones at the left end, and then there's all the ones at the right end. And then pretty much everybody, after they think about it for a while, finds this very unsatisfactory, and that's the right conclusion to reach. It's not satisfactory for anything beyond kind of just general journalistic discussion, if you want to speak somewhat casually. Now, part of the reason for this is that this left and right business is a product of a historical time. So if you start to think about these issues and you say, well, left and right, and we're thinking about a political spectrum, and we know that some positions are more and some positions are left, then our natural thought is to say, well, we draw a line, and we label this end the left end, we label this end the right end, and then we try to put all of the positions on that spectrum somewhere. But left and right is a spatial metaphor, right? And it is a metaphor because we're not talking about spatial positions, we're not talking about geography, we're not talking about geometry here. We're talking about abstract concepts that are integrated into political packages. And even from the beginning of the use of left and right, I don't know if you know this anecdote, but the history is kind of fascinating. It goes back to the French Revolution, started in 1789 on through 1790, and what the person who started using this label was the Speaker of the House at the National Assembly, and you had a whole bunch of people on the right side of the room, or a whole bunch of people on the left side of the room, and the people on the left side of the room hated the people on the right side of the room, right, and so forth. And so we just called it, this is the left group and this is the right group. But among the 100 or more people sitting on the left side, you already had a pretty big tent politically. Right? Some people, various sorts of socialists, various sorts of liberals, some people more or less religious and so on. And the same thing on the right side, some who were reformists, some who wanted to go back to increasing the power of the king, some that were more interested in having a constitutional monarchy or separating church and state. So you had a whole raft of different positions on both sides here in the French Revolution. Nonetheless, it was a convenient shorthand tag to say this is who's arguing and who's in contention right now in France in the 1790s. And then what happened over the course of the successive generations is impact of the French Revolution and the thinking politically. A lot of that moved to the east, through Prussia, through Russia. It got mixed in with the local designations, but they started using left and right. And then it came to Britain, it came across the Atlantic to the Americas, and we started using left and right, mixing them all in. And then that's like 2 centuries or more ago, all the political positions are evolving, but somehow we're still using left and right. But when you go to different parts of the world at different times, they don't mean the same thing. So The first thing then is to say, what we're trying to do in this spectrum talk is to say, well, there is a difference between these people over here and the people over here, and I do have this dimension line. It's a spatial dimension. Can I work on that? Now, what I want to suggest, though, is first, what we do want to do is specify the dimensions. If we want to say it's left or right or more or less, we always have to ask left of what, right of what. And it does make sense if I can draw a line, and we can look at the line and say that this position would be better placed here, and so forth. But you have to make what that dimension is explicit before you start labeling things as left or right or whatever on the spectrum. Now, what I want to suggest then is that when you start to specify those dimensions more particularly, it's more than one, and that's why we start to see people think, well, we need to have a two-dimensional matrix if we're going to define politics, or we need to try to do a three-dimensional matrix. And then we get frustrated because we're trying to do this on paper or on a blackboard, and that's a two-dimensional surface, and how do I represent 3, 4, or 5 dimensions on a physical medium like that? And that's where the whole thing starts to break down. But let's go through the exercise of trying to specify what dimensions are we specifying that we want to say there's something more or something less. And what I want to suggest is there are a number of questions that we are answering. And as we answer those questions, and we take the answers to those questions and start to put them into packages, that's when we can start talking about an ism, like liberalism or conservatism or theocracy or whatever it is. So let's just march through some of the questions. There's the first three. You think Aristotelianly, we can always think, there's all of the interrogatives, who, what, where, when, why, and so on. So what a useful thing is to start thinking, have I answered all of those questions, and if they apply? So first question is, when we're doing politics, we're deciding what the rules, the laws, what power the government is going to have, who are we talking about? Right? Who are the people? Who are, so to speak, the subjects or the citizens or the units of social analysis that we are organizing our political system about? And one of the things we know is some people will say firmly, we're talking about individual human beings. That's the subject matter of politics. Individual human beings are the reality, they are the unit of value, and when we organize society, it's with respect to individuals. Other politics deny that, right? We know that they want to divide people into groups and to say that the operative political units are not individuals, but rather groups. And so we have to organize groups, family groups, tribal groups, racial groups, ethnic groups, whatever kinds of groups we want to talk about. But there is a difference between talking about politics as the province of individuals versus provinces of various groups. And that's one dimension. So we can then say what we're talking about here is how many individuals are we talking about? And so there's going to be ones that are more individualistic and ones that are more collectivistic. And so we can array people along that particular dimension. And that's one question. Now that's the who question, but we can also ask, well, what are we trying to do when we do politics? Right? What's the goal here? And it's the kind of question we ask anytime we're talking about any social, if we're doing religion, if we're doing sports, if we're doing family, what are we trying to accomplish? What is the goal of politics? And we know again that there are a lot of different answers, and these answers can cut across whether you're talking about individuals or collectives. Right? We can say individuals are achieving these goals, or we can say collectives are achieving these goals, and there will be different, or it might even be the same goal, we just think that the units are striving for it differently. So we might say, well, the number one goal of politics is to preserve and protect a space for liberty for people to do whatever it is that they are going to go about their lives. Others will say, no, it's not about liberty. It's about this social unit achieving a certain measure of equality, right? Or we're trying to achieve stability among the social group, or we're trying to achieve peace, right? Or our group, our political goal is to conquer those other groups over there, take their stuff and take their women and do various other things and so on. So what is the goal that we are trying to accomplish here? And again, having specified those goals, we can put those along a dimension. We can say, at one end, say, here's people who say liberty is the number one goal, and then others that will, in varying degrees, say we're not interested in liberty or we're partially interested in liberty, and then the opposite would be a goal, one that says liberty is not at all the point of politics, some sort of total slavery or total domination is the goal, and we have another spectrum that we have defined here. Now, another question is, in our political system, we're talking about individuals or groups, how many people are going realistically to participate in the process? And then we have a distinction between those who say, well, basically, everybody who is in the society should be participant in the process. So we take all of the political power, we disperse it among all of the people, and everybody has some measure of it, and they all contribute. And so here we're talking about democratic modes of organization. And this is independent of what we think the proper goals are, and it's also independent of how individualistic we might be. This is simply say, who is participating? Or we might say, no, we don't think the broad masses of people should be participating. There's a small group of people who are better suited for whatever reason to do politics and decide politics on behalf of the whole society. Or there's one person who should be doing all of this, the monarch or the king. So here what we're doing is asking the how many people question, which is different from the what's the goal and who is the ultimate unit of political analysis. And so then having specified that's our dimension, we can say, well, democracy, aristocracy, monarchy are positions along that particular spectrum. Now another question then is, whoever it is we've decided is going to do the politics and wield the political power, how much power do we think those people should have? Should they have no power whatsoever? Right? Should they have precisely targeted, limited amounts of power to do these things but not these other things? Do we think they should have more expansive power, a bigger list of things, or do we think the political process should be about everything? And so whoever it is, whether it's democracy, aristocracy, or monarchy, in principle, they have all of the power over everything in society and should be able to exercise that power. So here we are specifying, along as our dimension, the power dimension. How much dimension from none to limited to moderate to total. And so here we can start talking about anarchism at one end of the spectrum, no power at all. Limited government at the other end would be various kinds of authoritarianism shading on into totalitarianism, subject from the various label. Now we're talking about power, we're talking about making rules, we're talking about people. What is the source of the authority that this power that we are talking about? Where does this come from? What makes it in some sense justified? So where is the source of this proper political power, however much we think it is proper, but where does that come from? This is more of a where question. And here, we know, again, wide range of positions. Some people will say, well, it's natural because human beings have a certain kind of nature. They need to be able to do various things of a certain sort. And so the right way for human beings to behave and the right kinds of principles kind of grow naturally out of our understanding of human beings in a social context. So we give a naturalistic or more objective, small o at this point, account of this proper source of political authority. The other end of the spectrum, we might say, well, no, nature doesn't tell us what our politics should be. Everything is subjective. We just make up our rules. When we look at the history of societies, we see their politics are all over the map, and that shows that basically anything goes in politics. So it's all just made up. It's all just subjective. Different groups make up different rules, and you can't say that your group's rules are better than any other group's rules because everything just comes from human beings subjectively deciding and conventionally various things and so on. And there's another position that says, no, you're both wrong. It doesn't come from nature or from human nature. There's nothing objective about it in that sense. It doesn't have that we just make up whatever rules we want because we are the ultimate source of authority. There is a higher authority. There is a God who has the knowledge, the power, the goodness, and he has delegated power properly to all of us or some of us or whatever the number of people is, but that's where we need to go to look for the proper source of political authority. So here we're trying to do a metaphysical question with respect to politics to say, what is the source of authority? And we say, well, it's out there in nature, or it's in here, in us, and we just make it up, or it's up there. And so we have another kind of dimension that we have specified. The rules and laws that we come up with, that we make, or we discover, or we have bequeathed to us by whatever the authority figure is, what status do they have? Are the laws absolutes that are not to be questioned, not to be challenged, but are to be applied exactly as they are written or spoken? What status do they have? They have the status of being absolutes. Are they principles that are abstract formulations covering a wide domain of territory, but nonetheless they require judgment in their application, and sometimes there's flexibility of judgment in the application. There's some wiggle room, perhaps. Are they just rules of thumb that more or less work, but you should expect that a significant amount of time you need to set aside the rule of thumb and go and do something else because that fits the various circumstance? Or is it more of an anything goes? There are no such things as constants or principles in the realm of politics, so what we call rules or laws are really just more or less empty vehicles that we put whatever we want into them to govern various circumstances, all of which are quite different from each other. So what is the status of the political principles, the political laws that we are going to formulate? And there's a difference between those, right, who talk about inalienable rights, right, or rights as absolutes, versus those who talk about, well, it's the exception that makes the rule. There are some exceptions, right, or there's some wiggle room in those who want to say it's just a flux and an ongoing flow. Another one, it's sometimes a little subtle. What are we trying to accomplish when we are setting up our political institutions? Is it the case that we think there is an outcome of the political process that we can define ahead of time, and the purpose of our political process is for all of us in that society, whether we're individuals or members of groups, to achieve that particular outcome? That's the goal. Or do we think the political process is not about achieving specific goals? Maybe there's a whole bunch of different goals, but rather it's to set up an arena or a space within which people can achieve various goals. Or when they're trying to achieve those goals and they run into problems, we're not going to say there's always right outcomes to those problems, but we're setting up a political arena, say a court, within which those differences over goals can be adjudicated, resolved, and it's that process that the political system is about, not achieving deterministic outcomes. So to take an absurd example, not an absurd example, a historical example, we might say the point of the political process is to hierarchical. The Pharaoh of Egypt is at the top, and the entire purpose of the polity is to prepare the Pharaoh for the most important goal in his life, which is to enter into the afterlife and prosper in the afterlife. So we organize all of the political process, including the building of the pyramids and so forth, and the religious rituals and the collecting of taxes to fund all of this, with an eye toward that one specific outcome, versus something maybe more analogous to a market. So I'm setting up a market, if we use an economics analogy. If I'm setting up a farmer's market, I'm not specifying what crops the farmers are going to grow, how many they're going to bring. Rather, I'm setting up a place where the farmers can come and engage in this process of commerce. But what goes on actually in the market is up to the individual participants, and I am just enabling that process to happen, not trying to direct it in a particular direction. So are we more process-oriented or outcome-oriented in our thinking about politics? And that's another fairly deep divide. And then just one more. When we think about where we are now, where we would like to be, however we've conceptualized our perfect understanding of what the political system should be, there's almost always a gap between where we are now and where we think we should be. How do we go from where we are to where we need to be? How do we bridge the gap between the real and the ideal. And so we talk about the difference between realism and idealism here. But the answer to that question is sometimes people will say, well, basically there is no ideal that's significantly different from where we are right now that we should be striving for. Things are good the way they are. Our basic institutions, our basic practices, our way of life is correct. And we should be conserving that and not trying to change it towards some imagined ideal in the future. So conservatism would then fit into the left end of the spectrum on that issue. Or we might say, assessing current society, it's all terrible, it's exploitation, it's nonsense, it's garbage. We have to throw the whole thing over, blow everything up, and start everything over again. And so we need, in effect, a revolution, and that revolution has to happen now. And again, that's independent, a question of asking how many people are participating in the process, what the ultimate value should be, are we process or outcome oriented, and so on. But just, are we committed to no change, to perhaps evolutionary change? But yes, we're going to make progress, versus we need change quickly, and that requires a great deal of destruction in the short term. So the point of all of this then has been then just to walk through 8 questions that I think are questions that we think about. We all do think about these questions, and then we come up with answers to those questions, and then we start to think about what big picture label is going to best capture my set of answers to those questions. So this is 8 dimensions. I don't want to say that this is final. I think this is a good rough draft list of questions. So part of the follow-up will be, are there other questions of this level of fundamentality that should be addressed? So maybe there's 9, maybe there's 13. Maybe you can say 1 or 2 of these is redundant. You can collapse them into something more fundamental. All of that would be an open process. But what we would be looking at then in doing the social science, so to speak, of political ideologies is to say, now we've specified what questions, and we've specified possible answers to those questions along a dimension that's more or less commensurate, and we can talk about more or less along that dimension. So we have 8 such dimensions here, and that's what's on the sheet of paper that you have in front of you. Next thing then would be to say, well, what are the answers to all of these questions? And then we can start to think about the political positions that we know are robust and comprehensive, where the people who are advocates of those positions have thought about all of these issues, and they have the answers worked out to them, and they've bundled them into a particular package. So if, for example, I am a strong religious conservative, for example, who thinks that my, say, ethnic group has the right religion and all the other ethnic groups and the other religious groups are wrong, that these are time-tested traditions that have been announced, right, perhaps thousands of years ago. Who are we to change or even question these principles and so on? So we start working that territory. The more systematic way to then go through and say, well, how would they answer these questions here? Are they more individualistic or are they more collectivistic? And we do know that some of those religions are much more collectivistic. The goal is for all of us as a human collective, or all of us in our religious group, to go to meet God, to meet our Maker. It's not individual salvation. You don't get there on your own, so to speak. It's a group process, so that would be more collectivistic on that dimension. Not particularly libertarian. These are rules. The rules are specified by a divine being that's watching you, and he's ready to punish you if you deviate from these rules, so you better follow the rules because he says so. So now we're collective plus a little bit authoritarian. Do we think everybody should have access to all of these rules and be able to talk about them? We might want to say, I'm just one possible answer here, say no. There are special individuals, there's not just one, there's special individuals who are trained in this religious tradition. They know the right answers, they know how to apply them. So we're not democratic, and we don't believe that there's just one person in charge of the religion who's also going to be in charge of the state. Instead, we're talking about an elite group, and so we come down somewhere in the aristocratic position here, and so on and so forth all of the way through. We specify our 8 answers to the questions here. We put those all together into a package, and then we want to assign a label to that, and that's where the labeling, the meta-labeling issue is going to come to. So, workshop time. Everyone has a sheet of paper, I hope, and a writing implement. This will just be a 3 or 4 minute exercise. This is an objectivist group, objectivist conference. Given your knowledge of objectivism, in 2 or 3 minutes, where would you place objectivism on these 8 spectrums? Is it individualistic, collectivistic, right, and so on? And of course, if you don't know the answer, just put a question mark. Right? That's the state of your thinking so far. Go for it for a few minutes. Okay, this is a work in progress, but let me just indicate this is my quick set of answers here. Now, to do this more properly, we would actually specify the dimensions, leave it open to saying, well, it's 80%, 90%, 95% along the line. That's a finer grain than I've gotten to on these slides. But the ones that I've highlighted in red here are what I would say objectivism's answers to each of those 8 questions are. All right, I'll leave it up there. And now let's argue about it. Okay. So turn things open to questions and discussions for our remaining 15 minutes. There's a question here, middle left table.
Just 1 second. Okay, here we go.
So when you were talking about the wow, that makes a difference. When you were talking about how it's not literally a spatial configuration in the room, or geographical or geometrical.
I'm sorry, I can't quite. Hey guys, yeah, I'm getting noise interference if you don't mind. Thanks.
So when you were talking about it's not a spatial configuration, left, right, and that whole thing, it kind of raises the question to me, what is the commensurate unit of analysis that allows you to gauge one side to the other? So for example, if you're looking at something like principles versus variables, what element is on that continuum such that they could be opposed to each other? Because wouldn't you want to deal with principles and, deal with variables in terms of the principles upon which they depend or something like that?
Yeah, for
Wouldn't
sure.
it be like a compromise to go in between?
Yeah, and actually, the way I would put this now is, thinking about this more, is I would put principles a little bit in the middle, and I would have the word absolutes at the far left end. So the idea being here is once the rule has been announced or the rule has been decided, it is fixed, it is unchangeable, it is to be applied exactly as written, right, and so forth. And then I would say principles, right, is a position that says there are general principles, they are universal. Nonetheless, they do require judgment in their application. So by analogy, it would be more like once we have done, say, our science of nutrition, and we say we need proteins and carbohydrates and fats, right? It's not specified that you need exactly this many grams of protein, this many grams of carbohydrates. The principles are there. As a human being, you need a mixture of all of those, but it's still a judgment call, depending on how much you're working out, what your other health goals are, exactly what the application of that principle is going to be. And then the point of putting variables on there is not to say that there aren't variables for the principled position, but just that this side wants to say everything is variable. There are no constants. There are not even really rules of thumb. There's nothing, everything is just closer to flux.
We've got another one right here.
Thank you very much for the beautiful explanation there. My question is concerning the last objectivism. I chose revolutionary because I would think that Rand wants us, like, from our novels to, like, go against the status quo, and so why did you choose evolutionary? And I wanted to shed more light on that.
Okay, good. That's a very good judgment call. As you were speaking, I'm reminded that Rand described herself as a radical for capitalism, and that means going to the root, down to the fundamentals, and she was arguing in the context of a philosophical, cultural polity. where she thought their fundamental principles were opposed to hers. So in that respect, at least rhetorically, she is closer to being revolutionary. Now, I think this one also is going to be one of the ones that is most culture specific. So if, for example, you are in medieval Russia under Ivan the Terrible, and the existing political system is the exact opposite of objectivism's, in that context, yes, we need to overturn everything, and the sooner the better. Right, so we would be revolutionary in that context. Right, by contrast, if we think, and this is why I'm making this judgment in 21st century America, that we have a lot of really good fundamentals, we have a lot of them misapplied, we also have a mixture of what I think of as a lot of false political principles, but by and large, we are doing well. So I would say we're not going to just tear everything down and start over, so we're not revolutionary. At the same time, we do have room for improvement. So something like that.
Got another one right here, Dr. Hicks?
Hi, my name is Rafael. I would like to ask you about the third variable. We have democracy, aristocracy, and monarchy. What about countries like England that have democracy but have a monarchy? Will be the midterm of democracy and aristocracy?
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting question. And there are other European nations that have monarchies as well. So I think you could say we have a hybrid system. There can be such a thing as a republic that's also a monarch. So you have taken all of the political functions that your country has decided on, and you've unbundled some of them, and those ones you have assigned to a monarch, and the monarch has sole discretion over those. Right? It's also possible, the American system, for example, that it's largely democratic, but also it is, on some of those things, we vote for members of the House of Representatives, but we also vote for the Senate. So we have the bicameral organization. And the initial idea there was a slightly more aristocratic, right? That the House of Representatives would be open to the Commons, so to speak, borrowing the British label. But as a check on unbridled democracy or on the common populist right approach, we want to have a part of the government with powers that are separate from that. And the expectation then was that it's only going to be men of property and a certain social standing who are eligible to run for the Senate. So that would be a hybrid system with a significant amount of democratic real power, but also partially an aristocratic system as well. In the case of England, or Great Britain more accurately, I would say that while it has a monarchy, the monarchy is not exercising any real power. It's symbolic, and it's a nod to British history, and there's a little bit of pageantry and theater that's going on. So another way then would be to say, while we do officially have a monarchy here, how much real political power is actually being exercised by that institution and how much of it is otherwise. So it's not to leave open or to close off the idea that there can't be hybrid systems as well. I'm beholden to the man who's handing out the mic.
We're coming right here to the middle.
I know this gentleman moved pretty quickly early on. No, I'm just saying, if you could put him next in line.
You're next.
Thank you so much. So my question is also related to the third part.
Sorry, the what part?
The third question, basically.
Third line, okay.
Yes. So I think out of the three, I think objectivism wouldn't prefer democracy over the others.
Sorry, objectivism
wouldn't prefer democracy over the others.
Okay.
So I think it'd be either aristocracy or monarchy, the lesser of the two evils, when compared to democracy, because with democracy comes with democracy there's this, it's ascribed to being the rule of the majority. And I think the core tenet of objectivism is that it places the individual above the collective. So could you explain why you picked democracy as something that the objectivism philosophy would prefer over the other two.
Right, absolutely.
Thank you.
And I expect if Mr. Trosinski or Mr. Salzman were here, they don't like this word either very much, so we would have more pushback. So what I would say that is why I think democracy is the right answer is that according to the objectivist position, we start with individuals who have sovereignty, so to speak, over their lives, and they are delegating power. So that's going to be an answer of what the source of the power is. Two, since we have a large company, it has to be a representative organization. But the argument is that that's the right way to do things because the individual being sovereign has a right to some say and control over anything that affects his or her life. And that would be universal. So that is to say, the expectation for objectivism would be that everyone has genuine political power, and that's the democratic conviction, rather than something that would be, say, we hadn't mentioned paternalism, right? That would be another spectrum along here. Well, no, you know, it's your life, but your life is best exercised by people who know better for you, like your pater or your mother. And so you don't really get a say, you don't really get to participate in the process, you are at the receiving end. So I think in principle, objectivism would say everyone should have a voice, everybody should be able to run for office, and that more collectively, it should be a do-it-yourself by as many people as we can get into the process as possible. Now, the issue of tyranny of the majority and democracy gone bad, ending up in populism, I think that's a real issue historically, but I would say that is governed by lines 1 and 2 above that, which is why the order here is. So the amount of power that is up for grabs, up for discussion in the political arena has already been decided by saying we're talking about individuals, and individuals have rights, and that means there's a limited amount of power that's up for grabs in the political process. That limited amount of power, we want everybody to think about it, talk about it, and since we're not all going to agree, we're going to do various voting mechanisms. So the democracy is a nested procedural element within more fundamental commitments to individualism and liberalism.
Excellent. And here we are coming to the front.
Thank you, Professor. Let me say that I have my doubts whether to choose principles or variables, because I recall reading on Ayn Rand's Ethics of Emergency. So if you could please elaborate further the relationship between principles, variables, and the conditions of emergency. Thank you.
No, I think that's exactly a good example, because there are emergencies. There are, where sometimes we think we need to step outside the law, for example. So we might say, you know, to take somewhat, well, maybe not trivial for the people involved, but right, you're rushing your wife to the hospital and she's about to deliver birth, and then the stoplight turns red. We know what the rule is, and we know, right, whether there's an objective value behind that, you know, safety in this context, so it's not just something that was made up arbitrarily, but nonetheless, are you going to stop at every single red light? Or are you going to stop at every single stop sign? So that's a small-scale example of the idea there is a principle at stake, but nonetheless, in application, judgment is required. I think more serious examples is if you think of the process of law and why we still have law courts, why we don't just say, well, you know, we've been doing politics for a long time, we should be able to just say, here are the 10 rules, right, or the 144 rules of politics, and everybody abides by them. If someone breaks the law, we take them into court, it's really clear-cut. And then we say, well, that's why we have to adjudicate, and we're still constantly finding that sometimes the laws fit the case and sometimes they don't fit the case. So the laws are good, very good, but they were perhaps formulated into a time when not everything was taken into account, and or things have changed and it's not clear what the proper application is in this new technological environment. So we might say, to take another example, your life is yours, you're an individual, or you say, I don't quite like this language, but you have property in your person, and so you have a kind of right to privacy, so we give an argument to that. But what exactly does the right to privacy mean in the internet age? Right? right, realistically, and we still have to think a lot about that. Or we believe in property rights, but as we are, particularly in the intellectual space, becoming more creative, what does property mean in the intellectual space? And so we still have ahead of us, thousands of cases adjudicating intellectual property and patents and copyright and so on. So that's what I mean by principles that are firm, objectively based, but nonetheless can't just be mechanically and automatically applied. They require judgment.
Well, thank you all for the wonderful questions. We don't have any more time during this session, but like I said, all of our scholars will be here for the duration of the event. So let's give one more big round of applause for Dr. Stephen Hicks.
Thank you. Thanks, man.
Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to give this video a like and hit that subscribe button below.